Go ahead and turn to Mark chapter 4, and we're going to start at the 26th verse. We're only going to look at a few verses in Mark today, and I'll just warn you up front, I'm going to have to do a whole lot of explaining on this parable, and I'll explain to you why in just a second. But before we get there, let me ask this question. Have you ever been part of something that, like one of those timeshares? If you want to, you can raise your hand. You don't have to. Has anybody bought timeshares? Well, not everybody has. I'm not one of those buyers. And it might come from my past. I grew up on the east coast of Florida. Then you say, well, what's that got to do with timeshares? Yeah, there's a lot of timeshares down there. But I have to tell you about GDC. You remember GDC? General Development Corporation. Yeah, General Development Corporation went down to Florida in the 50s and the 60s, and they started to buy up land. And they started putting names on it, like Port Charlotte, Port Malabar, Port St. Lucie. If you go down to Florida today and you see those names, that's a sign that GDC was there. Now in the 50s and 60s, they would get you to come down, and I think it was something simple. Dick, you were in real estate. Have you heard of GDC? It was big. They were the largest land development in the history of Florida. They would go down and they bought hundreds of thousands of acres of land. And you could buy a piece of Florida for $50 now, $50 a month for 10 years, I think is what it was. Not only that, in order to get you into it, they would take you from your New Jersey home or whatever, and they would put you on a bus or a plane or whatever, and they'd haul you down there, and they just let you see your land spreading out far and wide. Well, you guys didn't get that one. Do you remember what that was from? Land spread out far and wide. Green acres. You guys, I'm going to stop. You guys are just, you just make it too hard. So anyway, you can go down, and they just sold you. They gave you not just a picture, but they gave you a great presentation of what your life in Florida could be like. Thank you, Cease, for sharing about Florida and its 90-degree weather. I mean, you wanted to leave this and go down there and just get warm. That was in the 50s and the 60s. The 70s, they started to have some problems. Because it was a little bit of a scheme, you see. What they would do is, they would, develop this land. They might cut a few corners. Because, they laid out these neighborhoods with streets and sidewalks and lampposts. And they even had city councils. And the irony was that the employees of the company were part of the city council. That might be a problem. But sometimes sidewalks, you want your sidewalk to be with concrete about how thick, Gary?
4 inches.
Well, they might be 2 inches. Your road, how deep would you want your road? Your asphalt road? Well, you'd want it pretty deep. They'd have it pretty thin. And so they just kind of skimp along, and they were just throwing all this money out, and they realized they had made a mistake because they're paying everybody, particularly the folks who started the company, they're paying everybody exorbitant amounts of money, and not a whole lot was really going into development. So guess what they had to do? Buy more land and sell it to more suckers who they would bring down to Florida, and so it just perpetuated. And in 1991, General Development Corporation no longer existed. Now here's the irony. That actually ties into our story. Because imagine Jesus trying to sell you something called the kingdom of heaven. Now the problem is you've got to overcome human history. And we have a tendency, do we treat each other nice? Or actually, nicely? No, I've heard stories. So, see how that works? It just, you got to be quick. Yeah, got to check. So sometimes we're not all that nice to each other. And sometimes, especially when it's a stranger and they're selling you something, sometimes you can get a bill of goods, can't you? It's just not good. And so here's Jesus, and he's trying to sell us not a piece of land in Florida, but something far more important. And so what Jesus started to sell was substance. He started to talk about the kingdom of heaven. Now, how do you do that? And the greatest device that Jesus had to teach us about the kingdom of heaven was called a parable. So we're going to look at one today. Now, I'm going to tell you, this one's an honor. Why I started with this, I have no idea. I'm going back through my records. I'm trying to figure out, Rick Page, what was going on? Why did you start with this parable? And then as time went by, I did a little bit more research. I'm just thinking, well, this is perfect. But it wasn't me, so it must have been a Holy Spirit thing, because here's the problem with these 4 short verses we're going to look at. We're going to look at 26, 27, 28, and 29. And I just want to warn you about this parable. Do you know how many titles there are to this parable? About 24. Yes, I mean, it's been named everything under the sun. There's been so many interpretations, it's ridiculous. I mean, I'll give you an idea of what the challenge is with biblical exegesis, with studying the Bible. The parable of the prodigal son, for example, one really bad act you want to see is somebody who overinterprets it. So when the father brings the ring and the robe and the sandals and all that stuff, bad exegesis is you apply some sort of meaning to each and every little thing in the parable. And the truth is, the parable of the prodigal son really only teaches one lesson. You know, I don't know how to break this to you. We're not all that sophisticated as people. So sometimes God just had to kind of spoon feed us. So the parables are basically simple. And this one is basically simple. And we need to be careful about how we look at it. But just look at the beauty of this parable. This is big. Just want to tell you, is that up? See, it's up there. This is big. You got it. It's like this. So here's Jesus trying to explain things to us, specifically the kingdom of heaven, and he starts off with, well, it's like this. And here's the 4 verses. Bless you, my child. I had to be nice to her, because I just slammed her just a few seconds ago. Yeah, accused her of wrongdoing. He also said, and who's the he? Jesus. This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself, the soil produces grain. First the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. And as soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it, because the harvest has come. You got it? There it is. That's the parable. This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. You got it? And do you see why folks have kind of struggled over the years? I mean, who's the guy selling the seed? Is that God? Is that man? You know, what's going on here? How much interpretation do you want to put on this? Why not just let it speak for itself? And so, here's a field of, here's a little test of your knowledge. Wheat. Yeah, that's a foreign boy. He knows it's wheat. So I do have to tell you, this, and remember I've told you we were 11 years in Montana. This is what I viewed every day of my life for 11 years. 1 year, Suzanne wasn't with me the first year. She wasn't with me until August. And so to entertain myself, I would just go drive around just to see what was around. And I'm driving past a field like this, and Bubba, you're going to love this one. And I'm looking out in the middle of this field, and it's tall, and it's beautiful. Hadn't quite yellowed yet. And I'm looking at this field, and I see these antlers sticking up out of the field. And it, the prettiest sight you ever want to see beyond a herd of elk. But the prettiest sight was, as I stopped the Suburban I was in, and I'm looking, and there's a buck and a few does, and they get spooked. And whitetails, when they run, they kind of lope. And so through this beautiful, I mean, just this vast sea of green, just like you see here, against that backdrop of those mountains, was this beautiful sight of God's creation of these whitetails just going boom. And then they got the prettiest tails, they wiggle their butts as they go by, and the tails just kind of, they wave at you. It says, sucker, it's not hunting season. You know, it's too bad, right? So there you are. And I mean, it's gorgeous. Now, the people that Jesus talked to with this original parable, they don't have the microscopes that we have today. They didn't have all the science that goes behind it. All they knew was there was a science, it's what they knew, and that was you take seed and you plant it, and they had developed some cultivating techniques. But again, compared to us, we've kind of overanalyzed it a little bit, and we missed some of the points. And it really is beautiful and elegant in its way that you can take seed, you can even just throw it on the ground, and it manages to grow. Now we know you can, I mean, if you cultivate the land, if you put down fertilizer and you water it enough and all those things, yeah, you can produce more. We also know how a seed works. And I think because of that, we miss the beauty of this passage. What is Jesus trying to get across to us? He's trying to get us to buy into this, number one. So don't forget that. But here's all he's trying to say about the kingdom. There's a time for growth. But then there's also what in this passage? Time for harvest, right? So you got that? There is a time for harvest. So here's the big idea. God's kingdom grows. But what can we add into it? From their perspective, you have to understand that Jesus communicating to them, and from their understanding, what would they have unpacked from it? Not us with all our science and craziness. The power for growth comes from God. The design for growth comes from God. The seed is the good news of the gospel given by God. The soil is created by God. The sun provided by God. The nutrients given by God. Kingdom growth is for our benefit, but it is all about God. You got it? We are part of the growth, but God is essential to the growth. Man's the harvest. Because that's what the kingdom harvest is all about. Is that day when Christ returns and he harvests his kingdom. The kingdom grows as we grow, but it also grows despite us. So you got it? This is big. But how big is it? I mean, after all, wait, Jesus, are you telling us if the kingdom just grows and you can just throw some seed out and you threw the gospel out, what do you and I need to do? I mean, really, Cease, what are you and I supposed to do as Christians? Are we just along for the ride? No. We need to add in some stuff here for our benefit. Because remember, this was just one of Jesus' many teachings. So look at Luke chapter 14, starting at verse 25. And this is big, but how big is this? Now pay attention to what Jesus does here. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he says, now keep in mind, as you take and you pay attention to what's going on here, there comes a point in Jesus' ministry where it's almost like he's saying, You don't really want to be here. You guys are, I'm going to scare you off. As a matter of fact, that does happen. He starts to teach some hard teachings, and it did scare off a lot of people. His last year of ministry was not his popular year. He had dwindled down. By the time he's crucified, he only had about 500 followers. Now keep in mind, at the beginning of his ministry, vast cities were coming out. The entire city was coming out to hear him speak. So a big difference between his first year, well, his second year of magnificence, his great popular year, and his third year of unpopularity. So he turns around and he says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. You got it? Does that sound like he's drawing a line in the sand? I would say it's more than a line in the sand. I think he's drawing a line in the concrete, isn't he? Hey, I just want you to know, if you want to be my disciple, this is something costly. Look at verse 27. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the costs, see if you have enough money to complete it? What's Jesus doing now? And remember, early in his ministry, he pitches this idea of what the kingdom looks like. And now, here he is, and he's saying, okay, you guys have gone into it. You want it. Yes, God causes the growth of the kingdom, but you're supposed to be part of it. Now, if you want to be a part of this, you better do some cost accounting here. So you hate mother, hate father, hate your own life, take up your cross, follow me, all those things. Look at what he says now. Suppose you want to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost? Come on, estimate the cost. Verse 29 and 30. For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, the person began to build and wasn't able to finish. You see my GDC story? They didn't estimate the cost. This was a great cash crop. These guys out here, they're suckers. They're sucker born every minute. Let's sell them some land in Florida, take them down there in a bus, and we're going to make money like crazy. They didn't count the cost. And by 1991, they were gone. That's all Jesus is saying. Don't be like them. Verse 31. And notice he takes a dramatic shift here. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up, how much? Everything you have cannot be my disciples. Is this big? I mean, that's pretty dramatic, isn't it? I mean, he started off with, you got to love me more than you love your family. You got to love me more than you love your own life. If you want to follow me, if you want to be a Jesus follower, this is the cost. But notice, he then says, well, basically, if you're going to be a Christian, if you're going to follow Jesus, you better be prepared even for war. Because this is big. Does this sound like I want to get on a bus and go to Florida and see a piece of property and just kind of coast out my retirement years? And it's, $50 a month for 10 years. I can handle that. Can't you? Does this sound like it's a good parallel? No, this is pretty significant, isn't it? You love me, Jesus says, you better be willing to die for it. So it's big. Now look what he does. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? Oh, wait, I thought we were talking more here. It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus, you're really confusing us this morning. I'm just telling you. Yeah, so we got this picture of the kingdom. You started talking, love me more than anything else. I got that. You're talking more, but now you're talking salt. What are you saying? Really, what are you saying? So let me help you a little bit. I went and I stole salt from our kitchen. And then after I stole it, I was hoping that our cook this morning didn't need the salt.
I had more.
You had more. This is salt. You know, and does it cost very much?
No.
Did it in Jesus' day? Yes. Yeah, it was quite expensive in Jesus' day. And so here's salt. And have you ever thought about this parable that Jesus teaches, that you're the salt of the earth? We do know, we get a sense of that saltiness, that flavoring, isn't it? Hey, how many of you are salt addicts? For the last little bit, I've tried to do without salt. I don't even salt my hard-boiled eggs anymore. I have to tell you, it's tough. I'm an old salt boy. Now here's our problem as we listen to what Jesus has to say here. How does salt lose its saltiness? Have you ever thought about that? What's Jesus talking about? Really, have you ever thought about it? Have you taken this, you got one of those little salt packets like from McDonald's or one of those places, and you get too many, and are you like me? Are you a hoarder? So you take those little packets of stuff and you throw it in your desk drawer because you never know. You might need it for a lunch at work sometime, or you know. And then you come across it later on, and you pull it out, and it's covered in dust, and there's paper clips there, and tacks, and all that stuff. And I don't know, when was the last time you saw it? It could have been 44 years ago, right? And you pull it out, and then you use it. Does it still taste salty?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. NaCl, that's what it is. It's a stable compound. It does not lose its saltiness. What about if it gets wet? If it gets wet, does it lose its saltiness? No. You can pour this in a giant gallon of water, stir it up. What happens to it? It's not like sweet tea. Do you know Yankees don't know how to make sweet tea? How many Southerners in here know? Are you a Yankee?
Yeah.
He's Irish. Yeah. Yankees don't know how to make sweet tea. How do you make sweet tea? Do you pour the sugar in when the tea is cold or when it's hot? Hot, yes. It's silly to put sugar in when the water is cold. That's not sweet tea. Well, same thing with salt. You put it in water, and what does it do? It dissolves even in cold water. Now, guess what you can do? You can pour that on some cloth, take it out, lay it in the sun, and guess what happens? Salt comes back. Is it still salty? Yes. What is Jesus talking about? Number one, he's confusing me. I mean, first of all, he started talking about seed, or at least I did. Now we're fast forwarding a couple of years. He's talking war and loving him more than anything. And you got to really be willing to, I mean, you're going to pay the price to follow him. And he starts talking salt. What's he mean? See, here's our problem. When we harvest salt, we've got machines that do it for us now. We can even, when I was a kid, this was an expensive process. Now it's pretty cheap. You can get ocean water, and you can take the water out, and you can claim salt out of that for a fairly inexpensive price. You can dig in the ground, and you can go to great salt deposits and find these great big, by the way, when you dig in the ground and you go for salt, does it look like this? No, it's great big blocks. And you can grind it up and you can make chunks of salt. You can make rock salt. You can make little fine salt like this. And in all of those things, guess what? It tastes like salt. So what's Jesus saying? See, in their day, they didn't have the technology we do. And so they would go and they would harvest salt, and remember, it's expensive because it was fairly rare. It was expensive to yield, to harvest. And sometimes you would go out and you wouldn't have good results. Do you know what the Great Dead Sea is? Why do they call it the Dead Sea?
Very salty.
It's very salty. As a matter of fact, it's got all kinds of salts in it. What's great about the Dead Sea? If you're a fat guy like me and you go to float in the water, guess what you can do? Float. Why? Because fat floats. Okay? Now, if you're muscular, like, and while I was going to pick on Tyler, but he's not here. So, I was going to say, Tyler, no, maybe that's not a good example. But like if you're, there he is, I'm sorry, I missed you, Tyler. So I'm going to pick on you. I know. So I'm going to say, if you're a great big muscular beast like Tyler, and you let him go and try and float in water, guess what happens? He sinks, except where?
His head.
Dead Sea, because there's so much salt in it. But not all of it is table salt. And sometimes they went to the marshes and they would try and yield salt out of the marshes, and they would get salt that had too many impurities in it. So when Jesus says salt that had lost its saltiness, he's talking about some of that, just mediocre salt. And it wasn't even good for salt in your food, but you could throw it on the ground. However, there was some salt that was so substandard, it wasn't even good for that. Why would you throw salt on a pathway?
Keeps the weeds down.
Keeps the weeds down. So that's why he's telling this story to these people. So now back to our parable about the seed and growth. Are you needed? Yes, you are. Think of it this way. The kingdom does grow despite us. But also with us is a part of kingdom growth. You are meant to be salt in this environment. You're meant to save people. Over the next 9 weeks, as we share about kingdom parables, I don't want you just to think that the kingdom is a pitch to you to get you to buy a plot of an acre of land in heaven. That's not what Jesus is saying. If you're buying into the kingdom of heaven, Christ is saying, there's something you do here. And the kingdom grows despite you. But at the same time, the kingdom needs you to be salt in this salty or in this sterile environment. By the way, hopefully by the time we're done, we'll think of ourselves more as heroes and as lifesavers than as instead of pew-sitters. So just think of what Jesus was dealing with as he told these stories. He started with how many people? 12. By the way, were they sharp? And remember the rest of the story. These are, for the most part, most of them are just teenage boys. Now, I'm going to pretend you're a teenager, Tyler. Evan, you're a preteen. How old are you now? 11? You're 2 years away from being a teenager. Do you know what that's going to do to your mom? See, it's 4 until he's driving. Yes, that's true. Lily starts to drive next year. Wow. So Jesus is starting with a group of guys just a couple of years older than Evan. Evan, come up here. I need you for an audio lesson. Look at this. Look how tall he's getting. Isn't this great? Yeah? Wow. Man, what a great kid. He is a great kid, isn't he? Yeah. So, He's a great kid. Does he pull some stunts at home? Does he get on restriction? I bet it's over video games. How did I know? So anyway, this is pre-video games. Jesus is starting with 12 of these. And he's telling them these sort of kingdom stories. Now, in 3.5 years, by the way, since we're just the first Sunday after Easter Sunday, do you think those boys turned into men that weekend? Yeah. And here's the amazing thing, so you can go sit down. Those 12 men, I mean, they were stupid. Peter was one of the biggest idiots that ever lived on the planet Earth. I mean, he just was not sharp. And despite that, the kingdom started. The kingdom grew despite the fact that they were, like most folk, content with the status quo. Fast forward just a couple of years. Jesus had told them, hey, stay here in Jerusalem. I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit, and here's what you're going to do. This is not a kingdom story. He says, you're going to start here, but guess what you guys are going to do? They're now maybe late teens, early 20s. He says, you're going to be my what? That was too much trivia, apparently. Witnesses. You're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and Judea, and Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. They talk about casting a big vision. Did they do that? No! Thank you, Sandy. No, you know what they did for 10 years? They sat in Jerusalem. You have to fast forward. It's called Acts, the book of Acts. Fast forward to Acts chapter 7. There's something happens in Acts chapter 7. There's this guy named Stephen. Gets stoned in Acts chapter 7. And then in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. 4 very important verses. In Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, it details how this guy, there's a guy named, what's his name? Saul. Was he a prince of fellows? No. Remember in chapter 7, he's holding the cloaks of those who are stoning Stephen. And so it says in Acts chapter 8, verse 1, that Saul starts to persecute the Christians. You now fast forward to verse 4. The apostles, by the way, are staying in Jerusalem. 10 years after Jesus said, you're going to do great things. And in verse 4, Jesus kicked everybody in the butt with persecution. Using guys like Saul. And despite the fact that they were comfortable, they were content, they were lazy, they were inattentive. We'll have a test, by the way, after this sermon. But despite all those things, the kingdom grew. Do you see how that works?